Get off sh refined carbohydrates, including all sugars. Reading labels,
Mm.
um, realizing you're going to go to somebody's house and offend people, that's okay, or don't go. You don't make a lot of friends. Um, Realize that there's a lot of people and companies against you, and they're going to try and bring you back. It's like being a heroin addict. You
Mm.
know, you can't hang out with your heroin addict friends anymore, or an alcoholic. You can't go down to the bar and hang out.
Mm.
It's not going to work. That's the big step. And then building your aerobic system. Once you make the dietary change, the aerobic system will build very quickly.
Phil Maffetone, it is so good to see you, and I'm so happy that we can have this conversation.
Thanks,
Um,
Tam. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
yeah, I mean, it's so good to see you because I have to admit, and I've just admitted it to you now, I came across you fairly recently. Now, I come from a fitness background, so I'm actually quite shocked that I haven't come across you before because you've done so much in your career. You've written so many books, and you've made quite a stamp on training, like how to be good at aerobic training and how to be faster and how to be a better athlete. You've done so much work on that, and I just can't believe I've only just come across you. So I apologize if my knowledge isn't up to date on
Don't
you. As
apologize. There's so much stuff out there. It's like
mm,
with all the digital, with the online presence in the last 20 years, it's been it's been insane. Everybody's out there doing uh, podcasts and books and the latest and greatest. And, if you're boring, if you're doing the same old thing, you get left behind. And not that I do the same old thing. I'm always upgrading things. I'm always studying and writing research papers and learning about the latest things. And a lot of it is just confirming what we already knew. But the latest and greatest trendy stuff, like with diet books, is all the rage, and that's what people want,
ah,
unfortunately.
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I can't wait to dive in today into the MAF method, which I don't know if that stands for Maffetone method or the maximum aerobic function method, and I'm not
No,
even sure you know either.
well, I didn't know way back. I originally worked with runners, and with runners, we talk about pace, and I noticed that when runners trained at slower paces, their race paces got faster, and and then I realized that, well, their training pace at the same heart rate also gets faster, and that was a big breakthrough for me. So I called it maximum aerobic pace, MAP. And I quickly realized that that was a physiological term, maximum aerobic power. And so I thought, well, now I was working with cyclists and rowers and you know, football play, different sports. And so I didn't want to refer to pace so much, because if you got a cyclist or if you've got other athletes, you want to measure other other measures of their improvement. And so I called it maximum aerobic function. And I was a year or more later that someone said, "Oh, that's kind of nice. You got, MAF referring to your name." I said, "Oh, no, that's not what it is." So it stands for maximum aerobic function. And
I find it really, really interesting because, I'm not an athlete at all. So I come from a fitness background. I used to be a personal trainer.
I
I'm now
want
a
I have
nutritionist.
to interrupt you. I'm
Yeah, go
sorry,
on.
but we are all athletes.
Okay,
Some of
explain.
us, train to perform competitively, and others don't. But humans are naturally born athletes. We're all
Mm.
athletes, and some of us have let ourselves go, as the years go by, and others have not. One of my very first books was called "Everyone is an Athlete,"
Mm.
and they did some surveys after, I don't know, after a little while, to see how people related to the book and the title. And a lot of people said, well, they looked at the book in a bookstore, they looked at the title and they thought, oh, well, I'm not an athlete, so this is not for me.
Mm.
When in fact it was a book for everybody.
For everybody.
And so, you know, humans
Everybody's
are athletes
lovely.
by nature.
Yes, yes. But we just kind of lost our way somewhere.
Well, we don't necessarily have to compete to be athletic. We don't have to compete to be fit or healthy.
I exercise regularly in the gym, but I do have a 10K race coming up. So this is why I was especially excited to speak to you about the MAF method. And basically, your whole stance is about, correct me if I'm wrong, but your stance is about training at a slower pace in order to get faster, which I can't wait to dive into. And I have to say, you must get so much pushback on this initially because me myself, I'm training for this 10K race, and all I want is to run faster. So when I'm training, my goal is to run faster, like try and beat my time. My time at the moment is 1 hour and 1 minute, and I'm trying to get to an hour. So, I'll spend my next session trying to get to an hour, and then my next one trying to get to 59 minutes. And like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but that's all people want to do, right? They just want to get faster. But then you're
Well,
saying
that's
you
the
need to run
obsession.
slower to get
Yeah.
faster. Like that blows my mind. So can you dive into the MAF method, the 180 formula? Like, how does this work? Like, explain how this works because this blows my mind.
Yeah, there's several components to this so-called method,
Mm,
this approach that I've
yes.
always used. And uh, the training component is that the first thing you have to do is to build your aerobic system, because that's where we get our health from. And the important thing about health is that we don't want to sacrifice our health to get more fit. We don't want to sacrifice our health to get faster in a 10K. It's not worth sacrificing our health. This is a very obviously important thing in our life, no matter how old we are, even for children. Um, so the aerobic system is a very, very important part of our health. And the aerobic system, we live in a no pain, no gain society. So everybody wants to do everything fast and faster. They want to lift heavier weights. Every day they're going to lift heavy, and a lot of people end up injured. And an injury isn't always a physical thing. You can become depressed, which is a mental injury, or you could become, you can trash your metabolism and increase your body fat. That's a metabolic injury. That's become very common. Um, so the focus of running, training slower to race faster, you don't just race faster, but you train faster over time, um, is something that I noticed early in my career, because I was having people train more intelligently, which means taking it easy, and then I started using heart rate as a guide. This is before heart monitors came out, but I did have a cardiac heart monitor that I used. These were big, bulky things that went over the shoulders and around. Just they use them in hospitals for cardiac patients, and they just picked up the heart rate, and you can hear the beep, and if you look down, you could see your heart rate. And so I started using those, and what I found was that when people, in observing runners of all different types on the track, I found that when people's heart rates got higher, their gaits became more irregular. They developed muscle imbalance, very subtle. Fatigue set in earlier. And I thought, well, let's restrict the heart rate so they only run slow, or slower than they might want to run. Um, And lo and behold, they felt better, they recovered quicker, and they got faster
Mm.
in their training at the same heart rate. So the trick is to come up with a heart rate that's your maximum aerobic function heart rate. And that is very individual. There's no magic formula. There is something called the 180 formula, which I devised. And that came from, uh, I would spend typically 2 hours with an athlete when they would come in, and I would determine, how healthy they were, what were the health problems. I take a good exercise history of injuries, physical, biochemical, mental, emotional injuries. And then I would take them out to the track and watch them run. Or if they were a cyclist, I would go out on my bike with them and I'd view them from behind and the side and from the front. And I would use a heart monitor to see how their heart rate was um, along the way. Gradually came up with you know, a heart rate that seemed most appropriate for them as an individual. So I might say, okay, I'm going to assign you a heart rate of 152 based on all of this, this evaluation. And then I want you to train at a 152 heart rate and don't exceed that. And I'd see them in a week or two or three and and see how they were doing. And then I would start testing them on the track or on the bike, how fast can they run at a 152 heart rate or a 140 heart rate or a 127, whatever their MAF heart rate was, how fast could they run? And again, I would find out that as the months went by, they got faster at the same aerobic heart rate. And then it didn't take long to realize that, hey, now they're going into races having done no speed work, no fast training,
Mhm.
and they're running personal bests.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Let's do more of that.
Yeah.
And it didn't just happen with runners, but cyclists and swimmers, and eventually, as triathlon became popular, I started working with triathletes and Um, but others too that are harder to measure, basketball, baseball players. I was in motorsports. Basically, what you're doing is you're improving performance in a very low stress way. So that when you get into a stressful situation where you're competing, you can perform a whole lot better. It's the concept is really very simple.
It is very simple. So basically, what you're saying is that an average person like myself can take the number 180 and minus their age. And then there are some other factors to consider as well. I think, for example, if you've had injuries, you take off a couple of numbers. If you're very well developed, like aerobically, and you're quite athletic, then you can add some numbers to
Yeah,
that.
you
But
adjust it to your
you would,
particular
yes.
needs. So the
Yeah.
180 minus the age is the first step.
Mm,
And it doesn't mean anything. 180 minus the age is a meaningless. It's just a
mm,
means to the end. But now you have to adjust for your health factors, adjust for your fitness factors, and who knows where you're going to end up. But wherever that is, that's your max aerobic heart rate, and you can train at that level or 10 beats below.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
you just don't want to exceed that level.
Yeah.
And the first thing people do when they try it is they complain um, because they're going too slow.
Right.
Um,
That's what I'm saying. Like I need to try this myself because since I've been doing my research on you, I've been dying to get out there to try this method. I haven't done it yet. But basically what you're saying is if someone runs at a certain pace or performs a sport at a certain pace, at that 180 minus their age, approximately heart rate, then if they can improve that, if they can improve how well they can do at that heart rate, that means that they're actually getting aerobically fitter. And
exactly. It means they're
exactly,
burning more
right.
body fat.
Oh, I
They're
like that. We
they're
can come to that
developing
later. Yeah.
they're developing their aerobic muscles as
Hmm.
opposed to the anaerobic muscles. The aerobic muscles are important because they support our bodies.
Okay.
So if we
So
don't
what are
have
the
good
aerobic
aerobic,
muscles?
yeah, the aerobic muscles are the slow twitch,
Yes.
red aerobic muscle fibers that we
Hmm.
have interspersed in all of our muscles,
Mm.
except for the jaw muscles, which are all anaerobic. But the aerobic muscles stabilize everything, and they also help support the anaerobic muscles, even if we don't train them. We always have
Mhm.
an anaerobic rather, capability. We can always sprint out of a rainstorm or get out of the way of traffic when we have to. Um, for the same reason, and this is another interesting thing I learned, is that people who develop their aerobic system really well, they run faster and faster at the same aerobic heart rate over the months. If they jump into a race, having done no speed work, they often run a personal best. In fact, I did a study in my clinic and I had 229 seasoned runners. We determined their aerobic heart rates. They all trained for 3 to 6 months only aerobically, and then they did a race. They did a 5K or 10K, I forget which one, race, and 76% ran a personal best. These are seasoned athletes, so they had a lot of races under their belt.
I mean, the fact that you wouldn't need to include any anaerobic work in that in order for them to achieve a personal best, that is absolutely crazy to me. Where does anaerobic training come in then? Because okay, so I used to teach fitness. So I used to teach people to be personal trainers. And I remember saying, look, if you want to improve your aerobic fitness, you need to train anaerobically as well in order to kind of lift that threshold. So, I mean, what do you say to that? Do we need to train anaerobically? And when I say anaerobically, I mean obviously training at a higher intensity, a higher heart rate. It's more tiring. You can't maintain a conversation. You're breathless, like that kind of training.
So the important thing about building the aerobic system, and this is why they call it an aerobic base, is that we need to do that strictly aerobic every day for a period of time. And that period depends on you. How much are you improving? How much do you want to improve? So if you get better for the first month and then the second month and now the third month, you're still better. You have to decide, okay, do I want to keep getting faster aerobically, which will mean I'm faster anaerobically in a race, or do I want to do some anaerobic training, which will really slow down my aerobic progression? That's the thing.
Really?
So the the
Training,
the
so training at a higher intensity will slow down your aerobic progression.
yes, because it's a stress. It can be a good
Oh.
stress if you don't overdo it, but stress will impair the aerobic system. And people who are stressed in their life uh, have a hard time building the aerobic system.
So do you mean
And
injuries like sleep problems,
poor
stress, not being
sleep,
able to recover
um,
properly?
physical stress, biochemical stress, metabolic stress like poor diet, which we'll probably get to. And mental emotional stress, work stress, life stress, those things. They produce cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and it impairs aerobic function. Simple as that. The answer to your question is
Mm.
you can get into anaerobic training once you build your aerobic system. And
Right.
how long that takes, like I said, is up to you. But then you can do some my feeling is that anything you do anaerobically, whether it's short repeats on the track or hill workouts, or it's all very, very similar. And I always would ask an athlete, what do they like doing the best?
Mm.
Because I don't want somebody doing something they hate. If people hate going to the track, I don't want them going to the track. I'll have them do a fartlek workout on the road, which is an
Mm.
ideal anaerobic workout because you're letting your brain do the work.
Yeah, you're not
That's
forcing
where it
yourself
happens.
to
It's in
do
the brain.
something like
Yeah.
preset, like you're kind of reacting to how you feel at the
Yeah.
time.
And then they have to have a big piece of paper. Let's see, what do I do next?
Mm.
I was a track athlete, and so I love the track.
Mm.
But I would often, when I was competing, I would go to the track and I would do a fartlek workout. Um, just because I liked being on the track, it brought me back to, you know, those days. So yes, you can do anaerobic work. Um, that's a very important thing, not a necessity, but a very important thing for fitness and for health. But the other thing is strength. You need to strengthen uh, the body's muscles and bones, which really are one thing. We don't have bone strength and muscle strength. We have bone and muscle strength. And when we do something to improve our strength, both of those should work if it's a good uh, activity. And I should add that the typical strength training of weightlifting that's done today, the routine that's done today, traditional training, where you go to the gym, you do all these repetitions, and you you lift to fatigue.
Yes. Yeah.
Not a good thing. It doesn't
Really?
really necessarily strengthen your muscles or your bones.
Mm. So what does, like, would you say going heavier and doing less?
Going heavier and doing less. So I did a lecture recently at a fitness center, and I started out by saying I think the lecture was called Get Strong, which is the
Mm.
title of one of my books. And I said, here's the whole lecture. And I walked over and I picked up a heavy weight and I walked back and I put it down. And I said, that's it. You can do that at home. You can go to the gym. You lift something heavy, hold it, move it around and put it back down. Now,
Right.
you do that one time, and then you do it again later in the day, in between emails or in between phone
Mm.
calls, or when you I mean, how long does it take? 40 seconds?
Oh, right.
Um, and in the course of the day, maybe, or the course of a week at least, you've done that a number of times. You don't get sore, and
No.
you can do it every day. You can do it all day and every day. But you have to wait 3 minutes after you put that weight down. You've got to wait 3 minutes before you pick it up again.
Yeah.
Who waits 3 minutes when they're in the gym? The gym doesn't want you to do that. So
Yeah,
um,
right.
we have
And
this.
people are waiting for the machines and you
Yeah,
feel you're being
it's part
rushed
of the
and
obsession of no pain, no gain. We
mm.
want to do more. We want to hurt. We have to hurt. No, you shouldn't hurt.
So
Save
are
the
we
hurting to the end of your 10K run race.
so are we all just training too hard? Are we all just overdoing it? And
Yeah,
because I mean this makes sense because so many of us go to the gym and we injure ourselves at some point along the line. And then
it's
we're like, oh,
amazing how
I
many
did I
people
did
are
that
injured.
lift. I did that lift wrong that day, and that's why. And but actually it's probably a collective
It
number of
is. And so
sessions
it
that have
wasn't
built up
just
to
that
that.
lift, it was the cumulative effect and the fact that in many cases people don't have a good aerobic system. So they don't compensate, they don't support the joints, they don't recover
Mm,
well. The aerobic system helps us recover really well.
right.
That's why we could run every day. Um, Although if we're anaerobic when we run, it makes it more difficult. But I wrote a paper on the overtraining syndrome,
Mm,
a scientific paper, and I've written books about this. But um, uh, I would say certainly in competitive sports like running and triathlon and cycling, the majority of athletes who are in those arenas are overtrained, period.
mm,
Now, overtraining is tricky because it'll sneak up on you. And if you say to the average person, you might be overtrained. They'll say, oh, not me.
How
Well,
would
how
they
do you
know?
know?
Yeah, how do you
How do
know?
you know?
What are the
Um,
symptoms? Like just for an average person or an athlete, like what sort of symptoms should they look out for? How do they know?
the most important indication, objective indication, is that your heart rate will change. So number one, your resting heart rate will start creeping up. And more importantly, your training heart rate will be affected. And your training heart rate will creep up. But if you're training by a specific heart rate, you'll actually start getting slower aerobically. And that's a very early sign of overtraining. And again, you can't guess. You shouldn't guess. You don't want to guess with your health and your fitness. If you're training for a 10K or a marathon, these are big events. These are important events. And uh, don't leave anything to chance. Chance. Monitor yourself. Objectively measure something. Heart rate is a pretty good, pretty good tool.
I read a quote saying that someone labeled you as the godfather of heart rate training or something like that. I mean, that's a pretty
Oh
heavy
yeah.
title.
I hate these
Uh,
quotes.
but so a heart rate monitor
Excuse me.
is a num like how important is it if you want to get fitter?
Well, it's a biofeedback device that is a valuable tool for everybody, um, for almost anybody. I think the reality is that we're all influenced by social um factors.
Mm.
No pain, no gain is a big social factor, and companies that promote that, and they're all over the place. Companies that um, tell you to just do it.
Yeah.
Um, and that they have a new one now, and I can't remember what it was. I just saw it the other day, and it was equally stupid. But no, we don't want to just do it. We want to use our brain.
Mm.
Um, and so we need to approach all of this intelligently and not by chance.
Mm.
Um, but I have seen in my career very, very small numbers of people who can go out for a run. And when I would measure them, I'd say, okay, let's run at your normal training pace.
Mm.
And they'd be running along and I'd be checking their heart rate. And their heart rate would be exactly where I would have set it had I
Mm.
been training them. So there are people who can intuitively train,
Yes, yeah.
but that goes out the window because we're all looking online. We're looking at social media. We're competing with everybody on social media. We're competing with our friends. We go out for a Sunday run with the group. It's not a run, it's a race.
Mm.
The egos are involved, and it's really sad to
It
see that.
is. It is really sad, and that's why we're all getting injured, and exercise programs are hard to keep up with because we think we need to attend this many HIIT classes a week in order to get into shape and to burn fat and to get fitter. And I just think, if people take on this training at a lower intensity in order to get more, I think people would find it so much easier to stick with it. So, how long does someone need to be training, using the 180 formula, training aerobically? Would you say, sorry, the training aerobically, would you say that would fall under the zone two trainings when it comes to the heart rate? I mean, it probably varies per person, but
That's what
we,
they tell me.
right,
The
okay.
zones, the zones didn't come until recently, relatively recently
Okay.
in my career.
Okay, so you did this
Um,
before the zones came
yeah,
along.
before the
Right.
zones, and then they had these, people love cookbook formulas, and
Mm,
I don't ever have any. I don't have a diet. I don't have a training program. I've never given anybody a training program.
mm,
I want to know what you have time to do, what you'd like to do. Um, if you don't like long runs, don't do long runs. You don't need to run, 60 minutes to run your best 10K.
mm,
You could usually do three times what you're capable of doing. So a 20-minute run, if you ran 20 minutes every day and got faster and faster, you'd be running that 10K in, the low 50s.
So I was going to say, how long does it take how long does someone need to do this training in order to see benefits? So for example, with myself, my 10K is in December. So I mean, I don't have much time. But if I started, the 180 formula, low intensity, would I see a benefit? Would I see my 1 hour, 1 minute drop on the day?
From an aerobic speed standpoint, I
Mm,
call it aerobic speed, you would get a little bit of benefit,
okay.
but more importantly, you'd get some health benefits. You'd
Okay.
be improving your aerobic system for sure. So
Mm,
that's all going to help you.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you would be well recovered from whatever you've done up till now.
Mm,
And you would begin tapering
right, yeah,
a month
yeah.
ahead. When in December is it?
Well, I mean, it's about a month away. So I should be tapering now. I should be doing the
So
math
then
method now.
it's a perfect taper,
Oh,
which is
perfect.
something that people
Yes.
forget about because,
Yeah.
who wants to taper when you're because people say, well, I can't taper because my competition, they're not tapering.
Mm. And would you
They're
say no, would you say to do the 180 formula, would you say to do that exclusively? So I can't stick in one fast pace one just to see how it's going, like in 2 weeks'
no,
time.
you
No?
can't. If you're going to
It's
do it,
I so
you
this
want
is
to do it.
trust. So I'm trusting this. Like I'm gonna trust this 100%.
Yes, trust it. So here's what you can do.
Go on then.
Is your race going to be hilly?
No, it's flat.
Okay, and do you live in a hilly area?
Um, no, no. There's slight inclines, but no, I'd say it's generally flat.
Okay. I was going to say you could do some reverse hill repeats. Leave it
Mm.
up to me to do reverse hill repeats, where you start higher in elevation. You've got your heart monitor on. You're going to train your normal pace, but because you're going downhill, you're going to run much faster at the same
Mm.
heart rate because of
Yes.
the gravity stress. And so that will give you a quicker pace, which will help a little bit for your
Mm.
race. So you
Mm.
could do you could do some of those workouts.
Mm. But
Um,
really, people need months in order to develop this and to see real
to really get, I
changes.
mean, here
Yeah.
we are in November, we're
Mm.
going into, a lot of the big races are coming to an end. We're
Yeah.
going into the winter months in many parts of the world where people um, uh, aren't going to race as much. They call it the winter base, the winter training, the off season, whatever.
Mm.
And they're going through this horrific holiday season where they're going to junk out and ruin their health. And then in January, they're going to say, oh, I shouldn't have done that. So it's a great time to build a base.
Mm.
Um, Today is the best time to start building a base if you don't have one. So you'll get a month head start on everybody else. And by spring, you'll be, this is what happens. By spring, you'll be complaining that you have to run too fast in your aerobic runs. Because people
Wow.
in the beginning, they have to run slow. And if they go up a hill, they have to walk the hill.
Yeah, to
Oh
keep within the
dear,
heart
how do
rate
I don't want
range.
people to see me walking this.
Yeah.
So, but you get faster and faster. And as the months
Mm.
go by, you get to the point where you think, wow, I'm really going fast. Maybe I'm going too fast. It's a little difficult to keep up. You see that on a bike a lot sooner because of the 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 nature of cycling.
Mm.
The gravity stress is lower, so you have to push a lot harder. And um, but
I
in
ask
athletes, it
Phil,
wouldn't be
yeah.
unusual if you're starting at a 9-minute pace aerobically,
Mm.
and regardless of what you think of that. And then you train and you get to, 8:30 pace after a couple of months, and then a few more months you're at 8 minutes, and then next thing you know, it depends on you, but you're at 7 minutes at the
Mm.
same heart rate,
Right.
and you call me up and say, hey, I can't run this fast, and we have some tricks we can do at that point, but the 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 reality is that we can get healthy and fit we can prevent injuries, we can improve our longevity as an athlete, a competitive athlete, if that's your goal.
Mm.
And if you're not competing, if that's what not so much what you want to do, we still want to be healthy for the rest of our lives. We don't want to
Yeah.
fall apart when we get older. We want to be physiologically young. That's really a reality.
And a big part of that is fat burning. So you're almost you could, I mean, a specialist in this. This is what you talk about, fat burning. You say we're innately fat burners, but then a lot of us have lost our way along the,
Without
lost
a
our way.
doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've been fat burners. Humans have been fat burnings for millions of years. Um, that's the nature of the aerobic system. The aerobic system makes up so much of our muscle mass and our body metabolically.
Mm,
Um, Basically, uh, we have sugar and fat. We burn both for energy, and those fuels, those sources of fuels, sources of ATP, um, we manipulate based on the intensity of our training.
right. So
So if
lower
we're training
intensity.
fast, our sugar burning is high and our fat burning
Yes.
is low. If we burn slower, our fat burning comes up and our sugar burning comes down. So now we're training our body to be a better fat burner. That's
Right.
the whole idea behind this max aerobic heart rate is what's the best fat burning heart rate I could train at?
Mm.
There's a catch to that,
Yeah, go on.
and it's the diet,
Yes.
because the diet dictates our metabolism. Day by day, meal by meal, everything we put in our mouth is going to influence our metabolism.
And it's more important than even exercise or,
It's much more important
yeah.
than exercise. We can accomplish more with fat burning via the diet than with
Mm,
exercise.
okay.
And in fact, if we don't have a good diet and we're eating a lot of refined carbohydrate, which is now the world's top cuisine,
Mm,
um, even training the right way will not bring us to our athletic potential. We'll be
mm.
restricted at some point, and we'll be injured more. We'll be less healthy. So the
So what
diet
is the
is a
best,
is a big
right?
factor.
So what is the best way to burn fat when it comes to diet? What kind of diet should we be having?
Well, we don't want to have a diet.
Okay.
We
Yeah,
want
you
to
don't want to
eat
feel
what's
restricted.
best for
Yeah.
us and what's best for humans. What's best for humans is what humans ate for millions of years, which is a diet that was higher in fat, moderate in protein, and lowest in carbohydrates. The
Hmm.
problem we have today is that so many things are highly processed, carbohydrates in particular.
Yeah.
So the average meal that people consume is the equivalent of having like several teaspoons of sugar. And you wouldn't do that, but that's exactly what's happening because when we consume those refined carbohydrates, and I don't care if it says natural or
Mm.
whole grain, it's refined.
What would you
Hardly
call
any
refined?
food
What
is
what comes
refined.
comes under that umbrella for you?
Virtually everything
Yeah,
today
if you go into the
because of the
supermarket, yes.
market. So
Yeah.
it's anything flour,
Mm,
wheat flour, rye flour, corn flour, um, highly refined. It's highly refined being the key words. And when we consume these highly refined flours, that gets converted to sugar very quickly and
mm,
absorbed, and half of that gets stored as fat.
mm.
So even if we have a bowl of pasta that has no fat in it, 50% of it is going to end up stored in your body as body fat. And
And yeah,
not only that, but it will restrict your ability to burn fat during activity.
right. Because when your insulin levels are high, you're not fat burning at that time, right? Because if your
Exactly.
insulin is high after having carbohydrates, that means that your body is utilizing the sugar for energy, not the
Right.
fat. But when
Right.
your insulin comes down, that's when fat burning can be like, hey, it's time for fat burning, like not sugar burning, we're fat burning
Exactly.
now.
Exactly.
There's that
And
relationship, that
yeah,
inverse relationship.
that's all true. But that condition is even worse in people who are insulin resistant.
Correct. Because then
And
it's always high.
and that's more than 80% of the people in the world. We know
Mm.
that because 80% of the people in the world have excess body fat.
Hmm.
Well, that's been measured. Excess body fat is the correct term for excess body fat is overfat. 80% of the people are overfat already. So when you're already overfat, you're insulin resistant. Now your tolerance for carbohydrate is even lower.
Yeah.
So the question is how much natural carbohydrate can I eat? It depends on how insulin resistant you are. And if you're 18 years old, you're generally less insulin resistant, although the population of overfat children is really, really
Mm.
high now.
Yeah.
Um, um, so it depends on how insulin, and I have something called the 2 week test
Okay.
where
Yeah.
it's a food challenge. You write down all your complaints, whether you think they're relevant or not, and for 2 weeks you eat a very low carbohydrate diet. You eat a lot of food, so you're never hungry, and then at the end of 2 weeks, you compare um, your symptoms, your signs and symptoms before and after, and then you start, and if you lose a few pounds, or if you're sleeping better, if your energy's better, if you're not hungry anymore, okay, now the next thing you do is you eat some fruit, you eat some lentils, you eat some natural carbohydrates every other meal to see how that goes.
Mm.
And if you gain a few pounds back in the first week, you know that that's not working for you. It's really very simple, and that article is readily available for
Right.
people.
So how do we become more insulin sensitive? Obviously, you've kind of indicated that eating lower carbohydrates will help you become more insulin sensitive because everyone wants to be insulin sensitive. You don't want to be insulin resistant. That's the goal. So, I mean, exercise helps as well, right? So if someone
Exercise helps, but
exercises, that
it
helps.
all starts with the diet, because
Mm,
if you're eating carbohydrates and producing too much insulin, it's a vicious cycle where
right.
you become insulin resistant, and hyperinsulin feeds that. And by the way, part of that cycle involves chronic inflammation, so that you
Hmm.
become inflamed. That's why runners are in pain a lot. That's why runners are injured a lot. All those inflammatory related injuries, Achilles tendonitis, anything that ends in itis is an inflammation related injury. So, um, you've got to break that vicious cycle. People are
Mm.
caught up in that, and part of it's addiction, the addiction to sugar. That's a big vicious cycle, and doing the 2 week test will help break the cycle and
Right.
get you on the road to here's where I need to be. Here's
Mm.
how I can eat, and not be hungry anymore. Start losing body fat. Um,
Because
et cetera,
talking,
et cetera.
yeah, it's interesting because talking about sugar addiction, I think we've all experienced it in our lives.
Yep,
And
I have.
yeah, for sure. And I definitely have. I used to have a binge eating disorder in my 20s, so I definitely know what that feels like. But first of all, I've got two things to say. The first thing is that isn't it funny how we're told to reduce our fat intake in order to, make to manage our weight, and we're told to cut off the fat off our, meat, and to do all these things to be heart healthy and to, you know, be healthy in general. But it's just funny how it's actually the opposite. How they don't even
It
mention the
is,
sugar and the pasta and
and that's by design,
mm,
according to the documents from the sugar industry going back to the
Right.
50s,
Mm.
because they started showing in research that sugar was the problem with heart disease. And then the sugar industry quickly created this campaign to say that no, it's fat, it's cholesterol. That's the problem.
Was that the
Sugar's,
Ansel Keys era you're
yeah,
speaking of?
yeah,
So are you
yeah.
saying before that they actually said sugar was causing
Yeah,
the obesity
this was a
problem?
growing
And
a
then they
growing
basically
issue.
stomped it out.
Yes, they
Wow.
sure did, and they were very successful. In fact, the
Yeah.
19
So successful. It's
I've
still
been
going
writing
today.
about
Like,
those sugar industry documents in my research paper that I'm
mm,
writing now on brain health. Um, those recommendations of beware of fat, don't worry about sugar, they got into the very first U.S. dietary guidelines that came out in 1980
mm,
directly from the sugar industry. It's very much like what the tobacco industry did in the
yeah.
40s and 50s. I mean, they had doctors on TV recommending cigarettes. If you have a
Right.
sore throat, smoke menthols. If you, you know, come on, really? And
Yes.
people look at those and laugh, but they're doing the same thing today with
Mm,
sugar and
mm,
carbohydrate products. And it's really, and people, it's propaganda.
yeah. Yeah.
And you're told something over and over, and if it's fake or not real, people believe it anyway, and that's what's happened.
Well, what's really interesting is I've been dabbling in the carnivore diet. So I I like to experiment with different diets. Like I've kind of experimented with keto in the past. I've experimented with various different things. I love fasting and all of those things. But at the moment, I'm kind of dabbling in the carnivore diet. And one thing that I have to say in regards to this conversation is and in regards to your 2 week test as well, if you cut out sugar for a certain period of time, and then if you increase, your fat and your protein, it really does quell your addiction. It really does stop any
It's
cravings. Because
amazing.
and people I've spoken to on the carnivore diet, they've said that they even, they don't even feel like eating some a lot of the time because they don't need to eat.
Yeah,
Like they're
because
so
you're
satisfied.
you're burning so much body fat for energy that you have unlimited energy. We have,
Right.
even the leanest among us has enough energy stored as
Mm.
fat to go hundreds of miles.
I find that fascinating. I listened to one of your podcasts and you said that, and I was just like, that is incredible. But then
Yeah.
what do you say then so how does this relate to exercise then? Because first of all, someone who doesn't even want to eat that much anymore because they're so satisfied with their food, um, are they getting enough energy in their diet? How do they get enough calories in order to sustain their exercise? What
Yeah, we
recommendations do
certainly
you
need
have?
enough calories
Yeah.
to do whatever it is we're doing. So if we're already working out and we make these changes in our diet, uh, it will be reflected like in the 2 week test in terms of
Mm,
how much we have to eat. So if you're increasing your exercise, you just increase your food intake, your healthy
mm,
food intake. Simple as that. But one thing that happens in general when we reduce carbohydrates and insulin is staying low and we're no longer insulin resistant, is that our nutritional needs come down.
mm,
So we don't need to eat as much food to do the same activities. That may sound a little odd, but that's how it works. And now we could do, it's like running faster by training slower. It sounds odd, but that's exactly what happens. So now if we reduce our caloric and if we don't need as much caloric intake as we needed before, we've juggled our macronutrients around. So now we're eating less carbohydrate but more fat and protein. Um, our 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 caloric needs come down, and maybe it's 20% would not be unusual. I've seen 25% or even more. That's important because all the aging research shows that if we eat less food, we age better. The problem is we can't starve ourselves. We can't skip a meal and think, well, I'm eating less food now. I'm going to age better. No, you're going to age worse because you're starving. That's called starvation, and people do that, inadvertently with fasting or
Yes.
thinking I've got to cut. I'm gonna have a big dinner tonight. Not gonna have lunch.
Yeah.
That's just
You,
physiologically um, inexcusable.
yeah.
So
You
um,
can overdo it
yeah,
basically
but if we
with
can
the number
reduce
of calories,
our
like too
our
little.
intake
Yeah.
without having a negative impact on our nutrition, we're
Hmm.
going to age better, and that's exactly what happens with what we're talking about.
Okay, so Phil, though, when it comes to exercise, what about all of these what about athletes for the Olympics, for example? All of the carb loading and, eating thousands and thousands of calories. I mean, I think was it Michael Phelps when they published his 12,000 calorie
So much hype. There's so
diet.
much hype.
But isn't that what you need though? Don't you need like just
No,
so many carbs
you need to
to
burn
train?
fat. Fat has twice as much energy as carbohydrate.
But do we not need to carb load at all before an
Oh,
event? Or
never,
what? Are
never.
you
I've always been
serious?
against carb loading because I was trained in physiology and I understood what was going on. And I thought, people really do this? Um, I have an article called "Who Should Carbo Load" or something like that. Who should carbo load before a race? Um, and it's worth reading because it basically says nobody should
Thumbs down.
should,
Basically,
should
you're saying
carbo load.
nobody.
You basically don't want to change what you're doing. The body does not like change. So if all of a sudden one day you wake up, oh, it's time to carbo load, um, you're gonna stress your body. It's the last thing you want to do before a race.
So someone could
A lot
have
of that is
just
is
as
so much hype.
someone could have just as good performance on, let's say, a keto diet
Oh
or a
yeah, we've done
carnivore
studies.
diet
Yes, we've done studies on it.
without carbs. They can do just as good as someone who's carb loaded.
Yeah.
I mean, but people have reported though in the keto community, for example, that they can't exercise at as higher intensity as they do as if they're eating carbs. And that I guess the reasoning in their minds and in my mind as well would be when we're training at higher intensity, we burn more carbs. And therefore, if you have readily available carbs like right there from your meal, then it can just like burn it straight away.
Did
Does the
you
body
did
not
you
work
work
like
for the
that?
sugar industry?
Is that
That's what it
propaganda?
sounds like. Yes. So my favorite, well, to address what you said, um, if we train the aerobic system and we're eating well and we reduce our insulin resistance, we're now insulin sensitive, um, at high intensities, we burn less fat, but we're still burning a lot of fat at
Yeah.
high intensities. And I've measured it, and other people have now measured it. Um, so that's the game is you want to develop your aerobic system so that at high intensities you're still burning a lot of fat so you don't rely on the carbohydrate. And that's a reality. Um, one of my favorite evil um, ploys by the sugar company was, and they had a spot before the marathon about what marathoners ate for breakfast.
Mm.
And the camera panned to a stack of pancakes this high, and they said, this is what marathoners eat the morning of a marathon. You couldn't physically
Yeah.
eat a stack of pancakes that big the morning of a marathon if you're a pro.
Right.
Um, but it was planted and it was, I mean, when the sugar industry pays you enough money, you're going to say those things. You're going to have a spot
Yeah.
I mean, who sponsored the Olympics this year?
Oh God.
Don't say the word, but it begins with a C, and
Right.
they're the people that have produced, uh, a big part of the overfat pandemic around the world. Soda
Mm.
companies um, are probably the worst offenders of human physiology.
Because it's so
So
easy to drink. You can have
it's
so
easy
much
to
of it and
drink,
it
and you drink a
doesn't.
lot of it, and you get a lot of sugar in one sitting, and
Yeah.
it's addictive.
So another question, because I still can't get my head around it, even though everything you're saying is making sense. But when people up their exercise routine, a lot of them start to crave carbohydrates. So, for example, if I've had a big week at the gym, I'll definitely find myself like wanting that kind of carbohydrate fix, like a big bowl of pasta or just like
That's called
potatoes and
sugar
things.
addiction.
So, I mean, is it? Is that sugar addiction?
It is because when you're stable, metabolically stable, and you're burning a lot of fat, and you ramp up um your your training for whatever reason, um, you, your desire to eat more calories is going to show up because you're burning more calories, so you're going to need to eat more calories. But there's no specific relationship to sugar in that instance.
Hmm.
That relationship is purely psychological based on the memories that we all have of those commercials and all the signs we see at races, which are all sugar-based, reading the running magazines, which only talk about how wonderful sugar is and
Hmm.
all the ads that they have. And that's where it comes from. That's um, I wrote a research paper called Decision Making in Health and Fitness
Hmm.
with Professor Paul Larson. And we talked about what is it that triggers people to make a decision about training or make a decision about eating. Um, and there's some very interesting things that happen in the brain.
Hmm.
And what you're talking about is those short-term decisions, oh, I need sugar. Because we've all been taught that when we're low in energy or when we're doing hard work, we need sugar. That's where it comes from, not from any physiologically sound concepts.
Is it also a sign that my aerobic system isn't well developed? Is it also a sign that I need to work on that?
It's partly a sign because you're the craving. It's the craving.
Mm,
Cravings becomes a very important indicator of addiction,
mm,
and we lose our desire for sugar quickly when we change our diet. But there are different components of it, and over time we eventually lose them all. But it can take years, and
mm.
I call it the bakery test.
What is the
How
bakery?
long does it take to pass the bakery test? The bakery test is when you've gotten rid of junk food, you're not eating any sugar, you're eating really well, and now you can go to someone's house for dinner and not eat dessert. You could even go to a birthday party should you want to do that and not eat the cake at the risk of offending everybody. That's okay because you don't eat that stuff. But when can you walk by a bakery on the streets of Paris
Mm.
and smell the aroma and not be moved by it? That takes years, and it took me years for that to
I,
go
I was
away.
going to say, are you there now?
Oh yeah, I'm there now.
Really? Can
But
I
it took
ask what your
years.
diet is,
It
Phil,
took years.
right now?
My diet is what I want to eat. I eat what I want to eat. I eat a lot
Mm,
of eggs. I eat meats, uh, vegetables, um, almonds, um, sesame, raw almonds, raw sesame seeds,
hmm.
um, blueberries.
Mm,
Um, I have coffee. I have red wine. Uh,
lovely.
There's nothing more that
Mm.
I want. And I love it. And I'm so satisfied with the amounts that I eat. And there are times when I'll not finish what I'm eating because my metabolism, for some reason that day, is doing really well. And I don't, so I'm not I'm not thinking, well, I need to finish this.
Yeah, that's a great place to be. I mean, so when it comes to fat burning, just to kind of round everything off, um, in a nutshell, if someone's to say, I feel a bit overweight, I want to start burning fat, what would be your top tips for somebody in that case?
Get off refined carbohydrates, including all sugars.
Right, that's number
That means
one.
reading labels,
Mm.
um, realizing you're going to go to somebody's house and offend people. That's okay, or don't go. You don't make a lot of friends. Um, Realize that there's a lot of people and companies against you, and they're going to try and bring you back. It's like being a heroin addict. You
Mm.
know, you can't hang out with your heroin addict friends anymore, or an alcoholic. You can't go down to the bar and hang out.
Mm.
It's not going to work. Maybe later it'll work, but that's really that's the big step. And then building your aerobic system. Once you make the dietary change, the aerobic system will build very quickly. I I I had a long ago. I had a patient who um, she was doing well, but then she sort of hit a plateau early on, earlier than I thought she should have, and um, um, she wasn't really over fat. She was before we started working. Then she lost some body fat, um, and I was frustrated. She was frustrated. I said, "Look, let's do the 2 week test, and see what happens." Well, after 2 weeks, she was running on the track, a track test, 40 seconds a mile faster, and
Wow.
that's significant.
Just after the two
And
weeks.
yeah, after 2 weeks, and then she happened to say to me, I guess it makes sense because my both my grandparents were diabetics, and my uncle and my other aunt are diabetics. So, and she hadn't told me that when we did our initial assessment. So I missed it because
Mm.
she didn't mention it, and it made her think, how could she be so insulin resistant without knowing it? But she was. So sometimes those things happen quickly. But once you change your metabolism, become
Mm.
a better fat burner, that aerobic system will develop much quicker.
And just say the example of the person who wants to lose body fat. Just say they say, Phil, like at the moment, I'm going to the gym and I'm doing a couple of HIIT classes a week. Would you say stop that?
I would say either use a heart monitor and don't
Mm.
exceed your max aerobic heart rate, or do
Okay.
some other workout.
Right.
If you're not a competitor,
Mm.
going out for a walk will give you as much aerobic benefits as virtually anything else.
Right.
So
Walking is powerful. I mean, that's a whole topic in itself,
it,
just
it is,
walking.
it
Yeah.
is.
The
And,
power of walking.
the going to the gym is okay, but most people go for social reasons, not for health
Mm.
reasons or fitness reasons. And um, I'm okay doing social things. Well, I'm not okay doing social things. Um,
Me
if
neither.
if I'm lecturing or playing music, uh, it's okay, but
Mm.
I don't want
But
to go
yeah.
and but if you're serious about your health and about your fitness, because we need both, um, that's the bottom line. Start with the diet, build your aerobic system, and go from there.
That's
Doesn't get
amazing.
any easier than that.
Yeah, it's so simple, but I love conversations when the people turn common knowledge on its head. And you're just like, well, actually, this is the way it is, and it's the complete opposite of what you'd expect.
Yeah, it was
I
tough
love
in the
that.
beginning because, people would curse at me, and people would um it was hard.
Mm.
But when you start helping people get results,
Yeah, then you're like, you
and
can't
especially if
fight
they're
that.
world-class athletes, and people know who they are, and they say, well, who helped him?
Mm.
All of a sudden I pay attention, which is kind of stupid, but
Well, do you know
okay.
what, Phil? So my 10K is in December, and do you know what? After this conversation, I'm gonna follow the MAF method. I'm gonna do the 180 minus my age, and that there's more to that formula as well. And I'm just going to train in that zone. I'm just going to do that.
Great,
And let's see how it goes in a
great,
month. I
great.
mean, I know it's a short amount of time, but
You could do a lot in a month,
yeah,
but keep me informed.
I will. I will. Oh, Phil, that was so brilliant. How can
Thank you.
people follow your work? How can they start to get involved with what you're doing?
Well, I have hundreds of articles out there
Yeah,
that
your website's a great
all,
resource.
all you need to do is type in, Maffetone and 2-week test or Maffetone and sugar addiction. It'll bring you right to the article.
Mm.
My most active website now is
Mm.
maffetonemusic.com, where I do write exercise related articles, but I also I'm a singer-songwriter, professional singer-songwriter. So I have my music there and I do stand-up comedy and that stuff.
Brilliant.
Just started doing that.
Brilliant.
Where that came from, I don't know. This is what happens
I
when you
love
keep
this.
expanding your mind.
Yeah,
And
right. And when you live a
um,
healthy life, like
yeah,
creativity
yeah, the
flows and the soul
creativity
starts to
keeps,
talk and
I
yeah.
shock myself all the time. So that website is where I'm most active in terms of keeping in touch with people and um, um, sending out email blasts so people know what I'm writing about or whatever. I don't really do consulting anymore. I, since COVID, I've not really lectured much.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of slowed down, but I'm still writing. Like I said, I'm writing this big scientific paper now, which hopefully will be published early in the new year. Um, so I keep myself pretty busy, but that's the best website. Um, and you can buy the books, but the a lot of the articles have all the information you
Yeah.
will need, so you don't you don't need
And
the
also
books.
you have a free download, the MAF Method download, so everything we've talked about is literally in that.
Yeah, that kind of
Um,
outlines the whole
it
thing in
does.
very simple ways, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of parts to it beyond what we've talked about here. But what we talked about here is really the foundation.
Yeah. Well, Phil, thank you so much. That was such a brilliant conversation, and I hope that we
Thank
can do
you,
this again
Tanya.
and delve even deeper next time.
Sure. Thanks. Let me know. Good luck on your training.